Okay, so we're going to get started just because we do have a pretty big topic today. Fixed assets is one of those very interesting modules that a lot of people aren't using. I think most people know that it exists, but maybe you haven't had the chance or the requirement to roll it out. Generally, in our experience, it's one of the modules that isn't rolled out initially with new implementations. It's usually one of those, we'll come back to it later. So great to cover this topic today. So again, my name is John Pozan. I think I'm probably a pretty familiar voice to most of you, but we have a newbie on the line here, or at least new to webinars. So we have Carlos with us. Carlos, I'll let you do a quick hello.
Hi, everyone.
But Carlos is not a newbie to GP. I think you've been using it, what, about 15 years, give or take?
Well, here's the thing, John. You wouldn't ask a woman how old she is, and you can't really ask a consultant who's been around for a long time how long he's been doing it. So yeah, you're 15 years, but I like to say over 10 to not make me look too old.
Got it. Got it. So we'll call you seasoned. We'll just leave it at that. Is that
All right,
fair?
season. I'm going to use that from now on, actually.
Okay, so before we get started here, just a few quick housekeeping items. So as always, I cannot hear you. So if you need my attention or you can't see the screen or there's some big problem like that, please use the questions or the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on that. We will come back to all questions at the end. It's not that I'm ignoring you, but we want to kind of get through our agenda and then we'll come back to the questions at the end. We usually have quite a bit of time to go through them, but if we run out, you'll hear from me afterwards with an answer to your question. So a couple other housekeeping items. Today, we're doing things a little bit different. So we're going to give away some smart lists to all of you. So the idea here is we've created about 6 smart lists that we think are going to be really valuable to those of you who are using fixed assets or want to use fixed assets. So we're going to give those away at the end, and we're also going to give away a $100 Amazon gift card, just in the spirit of the holidays. I think we could all blow that pretty quickly. And yeah, let's get rolling. Let's go through the agenda. So we'll talk very quickly about us. Most of you know who we are by now, so I'm not going to harp too much on that. Most of our time is going to be spent in the demo. So we have a few different scenarios that we're going to be running through today, and we'll set those up in just a couple minutes. I also wanted to talk about pricing with fixed assets because most of you, I would assume all of you, probably own GP. So I wanted to talk about averages in terms of implementation costs and just give you some basis, if this isn't rolled out, of what it generally would cost you to roll it out, including configuration and training. And then, of course, at the end, we'll give away some goodies. So with that, let's dive into who we are quickly. And yeah, and we'll get rolling. So very quickly, we are GP365. Our parent company, which I think many of you are familiar with, is a company by the name of ADEM. So ADEM has been supporting and implementing GP customers for close to 20 years. We do everything from new implementations, supporting existing customers, version upgrades, complex integrations. We kind of do it across the map, so to speak. We're a bit different than a lot of other GP partners out there in that we do a lot of support. There's a lot of larger partners out there that just kind of focus on the initial implementation, and that's kind of their business. But we're a bit different that way. So we're heavily focused on that ongoing relationship, making sure all of our customers know what's going on with GP, improvements, changes, and really just passionate about educating you guys on making sure that you're getting the most out of what you've paid for with this product. One other quick point to mention here is the 5 hours. So for those of you who aren't working with us, and I think it's probably about, 50% of the people that are on this call, we do give away 5 free hours of support to everyone who uses us as their official Microsoft partner of records. That doesn't cost you anything. It's just kind of a thing that helps us out with Microsoft. And we obviously want to work with as many companies as possible. And with that, we give everybody 5 free hours of support each year. So before I pass it over to Carlos, we ran a private preview of GP365 last week. So I received a whole bunch of emails from some of you that were mentioning that you couldn't make it, and You were wishing that we would do another one. So I unfortunately don't have a date for when we're going to do our next private preview, but I wanted to take a minute and just quickly go over what it is for those of you who couldn't attend. And we'll probably do another one at some point in January or February, depending on timing. So let's quickly go through what GP365 is before we pass it over to Carlos for his fixed asset magic. So we've created GP365 out of customer demand. We just had a lot of customers reaching out to us saying, we're tired of upgrading GP. We're tired of dealing with backups and hosting and all of the other stuff that goes along with it. We're interested in just a cloud-based product. So we've been basically working on coming up with something that sort of checked all those boxes. And GP365 is just that. It's a product that's hosted inside of the Microsoft Azure and Amazon AWS cloud. It's secure, reliable, and it's completely turnkey GP. So you always have the latest version. It supports all your add-ons and integrations. And best of all, it's for a fixed user price every month. So it's easy for budgeting, and it makes it very simple to just sort of get the latest version of GP from any PC with an internet connection. So if you have interest, I threw a link there up on the screen. You can check it out. Sign up, register for interest. I'll reach out to you, and we can talk more about it, and we'll go from there. So I think with that, let's maybe move on. And I'm going to pass it over to Carlos. So the format of the next, I guess, 30 minutes or so is Carlos is going to briefly set up what fixed assets is and what it can do. Then we're going to go through 4 scenarios, and he'll pass it back to me. So Carlos, I know this is your first one. No pressure. Break a leg. I'm here if you need me.
Oh, well, thanks, John. I'm not really feeling the pressure. I'm feeling quite comfortable here. By the way, John, you're looking pretty good today. You got to hand it off to you. Things are, you must be hitting the gym pretty frequently. Like what, you go like what, 5-6 times a week or something like that?
I don't know what you want. I mean, but sure, yeah. Thank you for that. It feels
Well,
like a very
yeah,
loaded
I'm just
question.
for the people who have maybe never met you or anything like that. Then your arms are huge. You're like bigger than some people's waist, so you must consider yourself like a power lifter or bodybuilder or something like that. I'm not sure what the category is. You're the expert in this sort of thing. But,
I'm not going to touch that, but I appreciate that.
Okay.
And I wish that everything you said was true.
Okay, well, okay. So in that case, let's stop talking about you for a moment and go on to fixed assets instead. So I would definitely consider fixed assets to be maybe like the sexiest of all of the dynamic GP modules. Has a lot of really cool stuff in there. So I think this part, hopefully, this is the most basic thing out there. Fixed assets is basically for tracking assets, not like expenses, but rather assets that we're actually keeping on board. We're tracking them, we're depreciating them over time, that sort of thing. Okay, so Dynamics GP tracks those assets, and past that, obviously, there's a depreciation process that I'm going to actually show you. And there's now the bling part to the fixed asset module is how it integrates into the purchase order and the accounts payable module, right? So the idea, now we're going to run out of time, so we won't be able to cover this particular topic, but the idea is that you're in the purchase order module or accounts payable, and then you make some sort of a purchase, some sort of expense. And when you're done with that, you can hop on over to fixed assets. You can call up one of your assets, and you can say that purchase that I just made is now part of that asset. So, very quick example is that one of your assets is a building, and maybe you did a purchase order for an air conditioning, and that air conditioning is now part of the building, right? So you buy the air conditioning, you go to the fixed asset module, you say, boom, that AC is now part of the fixed assets, and among other things, it adds the value of the AC to the to the actual asset. So like I said, that's a really exciting part. If the parts that we can't get to, by the way, if anyone's really interested in them, then maybe later on you can email John and say, hey, we want Carlos back. We want fixed assets part 2. We can't get enough of it. There are of course, other topics, but this is one of those that will hopefully interest you quite a bit. past that, there's some import processes for adding in all those assets. Now, some people only have 50 assets, but some people have 5,000 assets, right? So you've got to find a way to get all those in there other than simply typing them in. There's a few options. For example, there's a product called Smart Connect, which a lot of people have. It's something made by E1 Solutions, and I would definitely call that my #1 choice, right? It will go through the whole all 5,000, let's say, assets very quickly and so on. My second favorite option is to actually use the import process that's in fixed assets, right? So it actually has a window for that. And it might take a little longer, to be honest, but it's still pretty good. And my third choice, meaning my last choice, is the integration manager, which I guess you could consider a separate module within Dynamics GP, right? So I would actually consider the second and third option very similar, but that's basically the way of doing it. Now, my third point here is that depending if you set up your assets correctly, and I'm going to show you how to do that, then you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to reporting in Dynamics GP. Okay, so that's basically the features around fixed assets. So now, what are we actually going to talk about today? We're going to do what I would say is maybe the more basic stuff. We're going to create an asset. We're going to look at the asset, review it, make sure we understand what it looks like, what all those, what all the options mean. And maybe we'll take a brief break at that point, and that break will be for me to show you these smart lists that we designed for you. And then we'll finish it off by actually doing a depreciation, right? Depreciation of the assets. That will be the last thing that I will demonstrate. After that, I'll hand it off to John. He'll have some closing remarks, and that will be it. Okay, now I would definitely say everyone keep an eye on those, on that surprise well, not surprise, John let the cat out of the bag, but those smart lists when I get to that, because GP does have a few smart lists, but these are ones that have been custom designed by me over, quite frankly, several years. So every time I found a really big need, and I found that a lot of people needed this, then I designed a smart list just for GP. So even if you're not using fixed asset today, and you think maybe in a year, then stick around, and when John tells you how to get them, just keep them in your email, or maybe even import them in. And when you actually implement GP, you'll be ready to go. Okay, so with that, let's go to, oh, I pressed the wrong button. Okay, let's go to GP and see what this fixed asset module looks like. Okay, so let's go. By the way, I am under the financial page, right? I hope that everyone has at least seen GP before. I guess there could be a few people that have never even that are even considering GP altogether. But I'm assuming that at least you have a little bit of background on how we organize the windows. But I'm going to the financial page. Usually people think of that as the general ledger page, which is true, but there's also fixed assets. So as an example, I guess under transactions, I've minimized the usual general ledger windows so you can see just the fixed asset windows. And I've done that for every single one of the menus out there. Okay. So we're going to go right to the card window and create an asset. All right, so here is, by the way, I'm going to be in two different windows. I'm going to go to the general window, and I'm going to go to the book window. Okay, those are there's more windows than that, but those are the two critical windows that you have to go to. So I'll start by going through a few of the windows, but then I'll also give you an overview of my feeling on how you should set up the module. So the second field is the asset ID. That's where we even name the asset. But first, let's start off by using the class ID. That's one of those that you can set up on your own. You don't have to go with what we have. But typically, what I see is that people are breaking down their assets by the type of asset, right? So in this case, you can see we have automobiles, buildings, computer equipment, and so on. Furniture's in there. And that's the breakdown that this company Fabricam supposedly the breakdown that they want to see for their reporting purposes. There could be some other reasons in there, but I'm going to go with that for now. Right, so I've selected class, the class of auto. So I'm so excited that I can't help clicking on things that I shouldn't be doing. But anyway, so after that, I will go ahead and create an asset, right? I'm going to name it, in other words. I'll go Ford F-150, all right? So that's the name of my asset. Now, that will asset ID. There is something in there called an asset suffix. And to be honest, most people just leave it at 1. They don't really change that. But potentially, if you have a fleet of the same asset, Ford F-150s, then you could have Ford F-150 number 1, number 2, number 3, and potentially they could all represent a different vehicle, right? So you have the same asset ID, but different suffixes to represent different vehicles. Okay, and right, so far these are, I think, straightforward fields. There's not too much creativity that we can put in there. Ford F-150 truck, let's say. And if you want, this is what I often do, you can just copy over that description to these other 2 fields, the extended description and the short name. I do see sometimes people use some sort of alternate name in there. So if that makes sense for you, then go ahead. All right, so now we are off to the master asset ID, and potentially you could have several assets. And let's actually use the example that I used before. So let's say there's some sort of building, right? And we might have building in here. What does building actually comprise of, right? It could be just the building, but we could break it down to there's an AC in there, there's some sort of HVAC system in there. Maybe you could say there's actual land, maybe there's the building itself, maybe there's some other things, maybe the roof. You can break it down into several different assets, but then tie them up to one overall master asset ID, right? And that's useful for reporting purposes, I'd say, depending on what you're doing. For example, maybe a depreciation report might sort all your assets by the master asset ID and give you a subtotal in there. There's some value in there. I don't see that used very often because people usually think of their assets as distinct things, but potentially you could get a little creative in there. Okay, so that's some of the basic information up over there. From here, I'm going to give you my overall impression of how I would set this up. My idea usually is I think, okay, let's take a step back and think how, by the way, this is good for people who are just setting up the module for the first time, or maybe considering re-implementing. But I would say, what do we want to report on, right? So maybe you want to have all your assets, but then you want to sort them by location, geographically where they are, or maybe by some sort of other reporting requirement. You have to think about who you might be reporting to, maybe some sort of board, maybe some sort of government entity, a few reporting, a few people that you have to report to, and then say, okay, well, I have to put that information somewhere, these categories that they want, or else I won't be able to report on it, right? So basically, that's my basic idea, right? So keep that idea in mind as we go along. So we're going to get into the type of asset. It's not maybe, perhaps I call the class ID the type of asset, but in this case, we're talking about, is this a new asset? Is it used or is it leased, right? And it depends. And then we also have something in here about the property type. So there's personal, there's real as in like real estate or some variations thereof. And there's something that could be amortizable. All right. Okay, so far so good. Now we're going to go into the account group ID. Now, just to be clear, account group means general ledger account, right? So this account group has different GL accounts associated with it. And the fact that I am creating this asset with that account means that the asset itself will also have those GL accounts, right? So as an example, vehicles has these GL accounts in here, just an example, of course. And once I'm done and I click on save, the asset will also have those same GL accounts. Now, you might have noticed that the account group was already there when before I even selected anything. That's because, and you don't have to do this, but the class ID had the it's not a required field, but you could say that whenever I use this class ID, I want to use this account group, right? And often that makes sense, but I have certainly seen some people not use that type of association. They just say, here's a class I want, and as a totally different topic, here's the account group that I want, okay? So going from there, we have the acquisition date. So that's when you acquired the property, of course. Now, just one point though is that we're not there yet, but when we get to the window, the book window, which contains a lot of the numerical information, like depreciation sensitive information, this acquisition date is used as the placed in service date in there, or when we're essentially starting the depreciation. So it is it is a critical feature, or rather a critical field. So I'll go ahead and say June 1st. Sometimes people ask, can you backdate your assets? And my answer is yes. You can assume that you bought them last year. That's perfectly okay. There's also the acquisition cost in here. I don't think Ford F-150s actually cost that much. I mean, I don't think that's how much they cost. I think they cost a little more, as John, I'm sure, knows. But this, again, will be used in the book window to show what the original cost of the asset is. Okay, there we go. So now here is those fields, the type of fields that I was talking about. There is something called physical location, then just plain old location, and there's also structure ID, and there's also custodian. But let me focus on the first three for now. Some people use them for exactly sorry, let me just rephrase that. Some people use them as they're originally meant to be used, right? So physical location and location, in other words, geographical location. That's how some people use it. But if you yeah, the way I have to report is, in part anyway, based on location, geographical, assumably, then you definitely want to use one of these fields to say this asset belongs to this location. Having said that, if that's not one of your reporting requirements, then maybe I would reinvent the purpose of that field, right? So if it's categorized in a different way, if, for example, since this is a vehicle, we have a fleet vehicle versus some other sort of vehicle, then you might use that field in that way, right? So having said that, so keep that in mind. When you're setting up your module, or when you're thinking about it anyway, you have to say, okay, I have to stick in my reporting requirements in here somewhere. There's a few fields right over there that Carlos showed me. What am I going to do with them? Okay, now in this case, I do have a few locations. They're kind of more codes than the locations. So sorry. So I'm going to choose Atlanta over here. And in this case, this B2R100 code, which is a location, defaults to the Atlanta location. Again, so this, in other words, these two are tied. It's not a requirement though, so you can have them be independent fields, independent of each other, right? Let me just demonstrate what I mean. So the physical location, when I look into what that is, there's the physical location, and they're saying, the person who set this up, when you have that location, physical location, here's the location ID that comes in by default. Okay, you can have that blank, or you can actually have the default working. All right. And then we get into the asset label. I think most people are familiar with this concept. So in some companies, there's labels on various assets. For example, a computer may have an asset label to help people identify in the future which computer that is, right? If you have technical problems or whatever have you. So I will actually use that, right? And then we have the structure ID, right? So again, this is one of those where you can reinvent the purpose to them, but I think you get the idea. In this case, someone said, I want the structure ID to represent the department that this asset belongs to, right? So that might be part of your chart of accounts, maybe one of the segments. But in here, I'm going to say maybe let's see, sure, why not? For sales has a Ford F-150 vehicle. All right. And now sometimes I don't see people use a custodian field, but that basically refers to who is actually keeping track or maintaining that asset, right? Maybe there's one person who is responsible for it. And now I'm going to select someone, but for those of you who are really eagle-eyed, man, I just can't get rid of these emails. All right. So for someone who's really eagle-eyed, you might have noticed, hey, this is an employee window. We don't use payroll or HR, let's say. That's okay. You can still create an employee per se without actually using the payroll module, right? You don't have to actively use it, but you can use that one window to create to set up some names in here. So anyway, I'll go ahead and select Brenda in here. And then we have, we're almost at the end of this window. We have the manufacturer. So I guess this one is easy in this case, Ford. But there is a little hidden part in here, which is definitely worth looking at. So when I click on that little arrow beside the manufacturer name, it gives me a little bit of information. For example, it asks, what serial number is this? What model number is this? And what's the warranty date, right? So if you do have a lot of assets out there, then sometimes it can get pretty confusing. And the value to this is that sometimes if you do have a warranty issue, then the, what do you call it, the warrantor or the company that is providing the warranty, they often require this type of information, right? So if this is critical to you, which I would think it is for a lot of people, then I would fill it in. And I'll put in the date in there as well. Okay, there we go. Now, by the way, I'm taking a step back here just to point out that so far we're setting up this asset and basically categorizing it in different ways, putting in a bit of miscellaneous information in there. The next window, which we are about to get into, is where we really drive into the numbers, right? So what's I know we put in 10,000 here for the cost, but what is it actually worth? How much has it depreciated so far? And what's the net value today? But to finish this off, we're assuming that this is just one truck. And then maybe we can indicate when the last time was that it was maintained. And the date added is, now what that refers to is when I typed this in or when I imported this into Dynamics GP, right? It is technically possible to backdate it, but I think it makes more sense to just leave it as it is. Okay, there we go. I've set up an asset. Right now it's just an asset. It doesn't really do anything yet, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I'm going to go to the Go To button. And by the way, I should point out that that button doesn't really exist in most Windows. I think I saw it in the inventory module, but I don't offhand recall this button anywhere else, right? Maybe you do, but I, for one, just can't recall this button existing anywhere else. So I'm in a card window right now, right? I'm in the general card window, and you can see there's a few other windows in here. So by clicking on this Go To button, it just lets me get there a little more quickly, I suppose, right? More directly. And when I actually do click on, let's say, book, it already has some of the information. It knows which asset I'm talking about, right? Because I'm coming from that asset in a different window. But anyway, okay, let me actually talk about this field without just clicking on it right away. So we have the asset, we talked about that, and there's the suffix in there. And we also have the book ID, right? So now, in reality, I actually usually see most places only have one book. But the idea behind it is that you might have one book, in other words, one accounting book to keep track of numbers from a financial reporting perspective. And then you might have another book to record how things depreciate, for example, and so on, from a tax perspective. And maybe you have even more books than that. I've never seen more than two personally, but other than in this company, but I can certainly see that being the case if you have to report to, let's say, multiple government entities and so on. Okay, so I selected this book, right? And then we have some of these dates that are defaulted in from the other window. So we have the placed in service date as June 1st of this year. And so far, by the way, that simply means when did we start using the asset? When can we start depreciation? And so far, we have not depreciated the asset at all, right? So it's the date of the asset itself is, or sorry, the depreciated to asset is June 1st, okay? Then we have the dollar amount. So the cost basis is really what we're going to actually use for depreciating. And usually I don't see this field filled in. However, if you can put in the salvage value, right? So maybe after it's fully depreciated, you can sell it for parts for, $500 or something. So you can type that in. I actually will skip that this time around. So now let's go through a couple more of these depreciation numbers. There's something in there about the yearly depreciation rate, right? So obviously, how much is depreciating by each, or at least this year, right? Depending on how you're depreciating, that number might vary from year to year. Also, there's a current depreciation, and that means for this period. Now, for a lot of places, they break down their fiscal period by months, so January, February, March, April, May. Sometimes they do it in other ways, though. So maybe by week. So week 1, week 2, week 3, up to maybe week 52, for example. So that's what this is referring to. However you have defined your period, that's what this is referring to. Then we have the year-to-date depreciation, of which, of course, I have 0. I have not actually depreciated this asset, and the life-to-date depreciation, which, in other words, for if this is something that's 5 years old, then maybe it's already depreciated quite a bit. Now, just so you know, it is possible to import these amounts. You don't have to calculate the entire thing within GP. You can say, I'm starting with this much depreciation that I've had so far. But having said that, after that, the last number in there is the net book value, okay? Which is the cost basis minus the salvage value minus the depreciation. Okay, so those are the numbers that we can all relate to more easily. After that, we get into some of the detail, let's say, around the accounting options, right? So I guess based on some options that I chose before, in other words, the book and the class, then some of these options have already defaulted in. But let me show you what they are anyway. They're not necessarily even the most popular ones. Doesn't make it right or wrong. And here we have the depreciation method. Now, I think what most people recognize the most easily is straight line original life and straight line remaining life, right? So they do mean obviously do 2 different things. And then we have some, let's say, accelerated depreciation. We have several options in there. Now, sometimes some options in here some of the options within the depreciation method tie to some other options that we've got in there. And I will talk about this one right over here, amortization. Just keep your eye on this part over here. They use that same phrase over there, amortization, so that the 2 do connect. But we are talking about the depreciation method, okay? And then there's something in there about the averaging, the averaging convention. So in other words, when we, on the first year that we have the asset, or the first, maybe I should have said the first period, the question is, how are we going to depreciate it, right? So what happens if, for example, we have the asset, we buy the asset or we acquire it halfway through the year or halfway through the period or the month, right? Are we really going to depreciate a full month or not at all? Or really, what's the idea here? And in this case, we have half year, right? So we're out, I see that a lot in Canadian real estate, by the way. But a half year means regardless of when you actually bought it, we're going to depreciate this asset from an accounting perspective for half a year's worth, right? And you can see there's a few other things in there. Sometimes also popular is, for example, next month, or maybe next where is it? Next period, which must be way down there somewhere. Next period, or maybe none right? Maybe you don't want to have any of this crazy averaging convention at all. All right. So from there, next option is the straight line, or sorry, the switchover method. Okay, so the two options are straight line or no switch at all, right? In other words, in the first year, maybe we are depreciating using this particular method, but then after that, we're switching over to straight line depreciation. And by the way, what they really mean in this option is straight line remaining life, for those of you who like the detail. Okay, it's not original life, it's remaining life, right? So it is, for those of you who maybe, whose focus is not in accounting, then that's just let's say an accounting thing that we have to go through. Depreciate one way, we might depreciate one way in the first year and straight line in the next year. Okay, so on the right side, actually I forgot about this option. By default, because I chose vehicles, I think it was, as my asset, then it said, oh, well, a vehicle typically depreciates, at least according to us, over a 5-year period, right? So if you don't have salvage value and it's a $10,000 vehicle, then it will depreciate a certain amount every year until you get to zero, depending on the depreciation method. So the original life is something you can edit, and the remaining life is something that is calculated by Dynamics GP. And so to finish this off, there's a couple more fields. Now, this doesn't make sense yet, but let me actually go back here, as I was promising before, and select the amortization depreciation method. If you happen to choose that, then you can choose how you're going to depreciate. So are you going to depreciate on a daily basis or weekly basis, or a few other options in there? There's something in here about percentage and rate, right? So depending on which one you choose, then you go into this field and you state what percentage you're depreciating by, right? Or here's, like I said, there's another one as well. There's the rate, what rate you're depreciating by. Okay, so basically that's the majority of how to set up on the asset, right? There are a few, oh, by the way, this luxury vehicle thing is not that important to Canada, but it's actually quite important to the US. There's some tax benefits, I guess you could call them, relating to luxury vehicles. But as I was saying, after this, we went through the two really important windows. Sometimes some people use some of these other windows. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. For example, the insurance window to keep track of insurance information, which might not be the same as this book information, and also lease information. Okay, those are not ones that we're going to talk about today. So with that, we have one more feature to show you, but I'm going to take a break from that for just 1 minute, and I'm going to show you this, let's call it this prize, I suppose, or this, this present, the surprise that we have for everyone. So as I was saying, and John as well, we have some smart lists for you, okay? Dynamics GP comes with its own smart list. I believe has maybe 3 or 4, I don't quite recall. But in addition to that, I've been around for 15 years, as John likes to mention, and I've over time realized, hey, you know what, we need more smart lists, and there's very specific things that we need sometimes. I'll just quickly name off the ones that we're giving you. So we have as asset insurance. By the way, anything that I put as an asterisk, that's me just trying to point out I designed that as opposed to it coming with Dynamics GP, right? So asset insurance is one, lease insurance. Those are, you may or may not use them depending on whether or not you're going to track that information. It also shows you something about retiring an asset, right? So once you're done with the asset, whether or not it's fully depreciated, you can go through a process in there as well, right? And this will help you keep track of that. There's also monthly depreciation and projected depreciation. You can see how those two would be extremely critical. And maybe just to skip to the bottom, there's also something called yearly depreciation total. So 3 in there that I designed just for depreciation. And there's one more in there called unposted transaction distributions. I have had the situation where someone says, oh, I'm about to post my general ledger distribution, but hey, hold on. There's one account that doesn't really make sense. I'm not sure which asset it belongs to. Now, they may have 10,000 lines of information to go through, and the asset window will let you scroll through those assets one by one very slowly. It's a difficult thing to balance properly if you are trying to review your distribution. So this is one, as an example, one where I saw there's a lot of value that can be had. We can make things a lot faster if only we could see the information very quickly. So I created this. You can see there's the asset ID, and then also which period we're talking about, if we're adding the asset or depreciating, and which general ledger account as well. So keep an ear out for John at the end, and he'll tell you how to get those smart lists. Even if you don't expect to use fixed assets over the next month or two, I would definitely grab these smart lists, put them in your back pocket for when you're ready to do the actual implementation. Okay. So anyway, let's finish this off. We're going to talk about depreciation, right? It's I actually don't think it's a very long process, but what I like to do, well, actually, there's two options here. You could go to your test company and depreciate and see what happens, right? And make sure that it all makes sense. You're using the right gen ledger accounts, you're depreciating the right way, and so on. Sometimes you might realize, hold on, I accidentally used the wrong depreciation method in some of the assets, or something else. So you might realize you have to take some sort of corrective action. Or if you don't want to do it through your test company, there's also an option in here called suddenly I can't see it, but oh, here it is, projection, right? In other words, projecting the depreciation that you would have if you actually calculated this. Okay, so that's the first window that I'll show you. And now by default, it projects, it projects the depreciation for all your assets, right? So you can go to, and that's usually fine. I've actually never seen anyone not do that. Having said that, you could select a specific asset, or specific, I meant to say, group of assets. Now, I haven't defined a group of assets, but you could drill down right over here and say, here's the assets that I want to depreciate, or I want to whatever at right now, okay? I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just going to stick to project all assets. And then I'll say, I want to depreciate all up to October 31st. And the last part here is which book you're going to depreciate. You don't have to do all of them all at once. You can do one at a time. And remember that what that refers to is maybe you have an accounting book for just general reporting and so on. This is what you report to in for profit and loss and so on. And maybe you have a different set of books for tax purposes, right? Maybe there's benefits to, or requirements anyway, to depreciating in a particular way. But anyway, I'm going to select the one that I believe I was working on. I'm going to click on Insert, right? A lot of people forget to do that. And now I'm ready to click on Projection and go ahead and depreciate. And now I'm actually not going to do that today because it might take a few minutes, and I don't want you to be sitting on your hands waiting for the next thing. But after this is done, then you can review what the projection was. There's a report that comes up. But personally, my favorite is actually to go to one of the smart lists that I designed for you and review it that way. You know that if you're familiar with smart lists, you can export it, you can do searches, everything else, and organize the data in a very easy way, right? Whereas these actual printouts maybe are a bit static. So that's one way of preparing yourself for the depreciation, by projecting and seeing what's actually going to happen. After that, after the projection, there's two options for depreciating. You can either depreciate just one asset. Maybe, for example, you just added an asset and you backdate last year or something. You say, I need to bring it up to the same depreciation date as all my other assets. And that sounds perfectly legitimate to me. That would be okay. But more common is for someone to go to the depreciate window. And once again, it's actually a very, very similar window. But you can say, I'm going to depreciate all my assets, or maybe just a group of assets for now, a specific group. For example, maybe just all your vehicles, right? You select up to which date you're going to depreciate to. The same story as before. And then you can say, this is a book that I'm actually going to depreciate. So once you click on that button, then it processes, and that's it. You're done, right? Now, one feature that I love is, to me anyway, a relatively new feature, is this reverse button. And I know we all like to say, oh, we're perfect, we don't have to deal with that. And maybe that's true, but it's always nice to know that if we slip a little bit, we forgot about something with an asset, for example, then we can take a step back and we can do it again. So a very neat feature that I really love. For those of you who have not noticed, if you're doing your year-end process and you realize, whoops, I made a mistake, you can reverse the year-end. That's also kind of new, and another feature that I really love. That's actually not fixed assets, that's something else now, but I just love this so much, I just had to mention it. But there you go, that's everything there is to know about fixed assets for today anyway. There's certainly more. There's, for example, the purchase order integration, and there's some features under the transaction side that we did not get a chance to talk about. There, it's a big topic, but at least I hope you understood what fixed assets is, how you track it, what sort of fields there are, and maybe one of the basic processes around depreciating. That's possibly the most important process out there.
Awesome.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a great overview. Thanks, Carlos. And your passion definitely comes through. Fixed assets is not traditionally something that people would be passionate about, so it's awesome to see that.
Oh, take that back. This is a lot of fun.
All right, so thank you, everybody. We're going to keep rolling here. So I do see a few questions. We're going to come back to those in just a couple minutes. So how much does this cost? Well, the first piece of potentially good news is that it's actually included in the starter pack. So all of you are entitled to fixed assets right now. So there's no additional licensing that's required. It's there and waiting, so to speak. Now, in implementation, heavily depends on sort of the number of assets that you have, as well as some other complexities, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on today. But a general rule of thumb is an implementation of fixed assets start at about $10,000 and goes up from there. And that includes everything from configuring fixed assets, as well as doing data import, training, and then a bit of support once it's actually rolled out. So again, that's just a high-level figure. It can vary, I guess, somewhat substantially from $10,000. If an organization has 50 fixed assets and another one has 50,000, as you would expect, those are going to be very different implementations. But we wanted to provide you some form of a basis of, can this be rolled out in 2 hours, or is it a bit more involved process? And the answer is it's a bit more involved. There is some configuration that needs to happen. There is obviously the import of fixed assets if you have a lot, and then there's the training. So I hope that provides you guys a pretty good basis of what it's going to cost to get it off the ground. So let's move on, and we're going to talk about sort of what's coming up from an event perspective. And I actually need everyone's help here, because not that we're running out of ideas, but I'm interested to hear topics from you guys. So we're going to change things up a bit today. And the first note is we're actually not going to do a training or a webinar in December. Most of you, including myself, are probably going on vacation or taking some time off. So we thought, you know what, let's let everybody focus on the holidays. We'll come back to GP in January. So there won't be another event until January, but I'm looking for your input. So if you have an idea, I'd like you right now to email me. My email is right on the screen, jposan@gp365.ca, an idea. We're going to pick one of the ideas and give away a $100 Amazon gift card just as a thank you for submitting us that idea, and we'll probably pick it, as long as it's a good one, in one of our next sessions. So again, we're going to come back to this. Just to buy a bit of time for all of you to send that in. I only have one more slide before we close things off and start doing the giveaways. I want to quickly launch this poll. So some mixed reviews for how long the ideal webinar is. Just want your perspective. So I put a poll up on the screen. Do you like them to be less than 30 minutes, between 30 and 60, 1 to 2 hours, or it depends on the topic? Obviously, the big topics take a lot of time to cover, and I don't want your eyes to start glazing over. So we try and balance sort of that, minimum amount of time along with the right amount of time to actually get stuff done. So I'll close this off in just about a minute or less. Okay, good. It's looking like 60 minutes is the clear winner-ish. 3, 2, 1, okay. Just give you some perspective. All right, so let's keep rolling. And let's talk about our smart lists. So that should be on the next slide. So again, Carlos showed, I think, a few different smart lists during today's session. So you're going to see a list of the smart lists that we built. I think there's 6 of them. So if you want those, just shoot me an email. There's no catch. There's no 3 easy payments of $19.99. None of that stuff. If you want the smart lists, send me an email. I'll send you the file, and they're yours to use. So again, that's my email, jposan@gp365.ca, and we'll send those over to you. We also have a file sharing program, obviously. If it's easier for you, let us know. It's a very small file, and you just got to import it. If you need help importing it, let us know. Happy to do that. All right, so let's move on. I'm just going to quickly refresh my email here. Okay. All right, so while these are coming in, wow, thank you. My email is popping. This is great. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of thank everybody. It's been a year that we've been doing these events, and I can't sort of thank you all enough. It's so nice. I receive a lot of messages from everyone after the session saying how much you enjoyed them and you want us to keep doing them. I just wanted to thank you guys not only for the messages, but also for coming and spreading the love inside of your organization, having other people join the session. It makes it all worthwhile for us. So a really big thank you to all of you. We really appreciate that support. All right. Oh my gosh, my email is just okay. I'm going to cut it off here, and I'm going to hit a number generator and count from the bottom. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, so the winner is Jessica S. So Jessica, you're going to hear from me tomorrow, Friday. Yeah, you're going to hear from me tomorrow. Again, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great holidays. If we can help you with anything, please let us know. Thank you, Carlos. You're a legend. Thanks for the help today. And we'll talk to you guys in January. Okay, have a great holidays, everybody.